Hello, my friends. Jay Todd here. I've caught up with Alan Feldman, Executive Vice President of MGM Resorts, and we're here at the Global Gaming Expo. Just come out of a session on state-to-state regulation versus federal regulation. Mr. Feldman, thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate your insight in this subject. For the players watching out there that are interested in online gambling, can you maybe explain some of the benefits or detriments of state-by-state regulation, where it looks like we're headed right now, versus having a federal regulatory structure?
Well, the state-by-state model, the impact to the players really only has to do with whether the players are going to be moving around state by state. Because if a player is resident in a state, then they're going to play by the rules of those states. If they move around and they start going to or have business in or regularly, they may even live in a couple of states, then they may encounter a circumstance where the rules in, say, where you live during the winter are different than the rules where you live during the summer. But other than that, there won't be a huge difference, particularly if someone is resident in a state year-round and that's where they play, they're going to get very accustomed to that.
Okay, so from a player perspective, there's really not much that difference, in a state-by-state versus federal, except perhaps a timeline. Do you see a timeline that a federal bill, maybe way down the road, but states are doing it now? This certainly would affect players in the short term.
Well, frankly, I don't see a timeline for a federal bill. I mean, I think that the chances are so minimal that I just don't see it as being realistic. I think this is going to turn into a state-by-state circumstance, and in that regard, then I think one of the major impacts from a player perspective is that you're going to find early adopter states. New Jersey will clearly be one of them. Nevada is one of them. They're going to be up and running. So if you are, just sake of discussion, if you live in Pennsylvania but you work in New Jersey, you may be in one state that doesn't allow this activity and go to another state that does. And so you've got to be mindful of where you're going to play, because you can only play where it's legal. And that's sort of what a federal bill might have helped to facilitate a more smooth timeline across the states. Even with the federal bill, it's important to remember that states had the right to choose to participate or not. So there was still always going to be a certain level of state decision-making in this, one way or another.
All right, one last thing. It's been curious to me that Nevada and New Jersey, two of the first states to go live with regulated online gambling, of course New Jersey coming online soon, but there's already talk about perhaps commingling the player base there and having some liquidity across both states. This would, of course, perhaps force the federal government to take a look at this. Is there any truth to this, or does this thing have any feet?
Well, I don't know that I would agree that states compacting automatically forces the federal government to do anything. I think that we've seen that very little can force the federal government, at least our federal government, to do much of anything, up to and including economic disaster. That doesn't seem to be able to cause them to do anything. So a couple of states compacting to get into internet gaming would hardly seem to be a trigger for the federal government to act. Where I think there is going to be much more likely to see some form of federal government interaction is, let's just go down the road here a few years where we have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen states involved in this. There's going to come a point in time where those states and their ability to collect tax revenues from this activity are going to be negatively affected, because there's still going to be illegal operators. And those illegal operators are going to be drawing customers off of the grid, and thereby preventing the states from getting the benefit of doing this in the first place. Now the state is the harmed party. And I think when that happens, that's when you're going to see the possibility of states taking action, or U.S. attorneys, the federal representatives within those states, taking action on behalf of the state to go get their money. And that's where I sort of see the likelihood of federal action. But I think that there's a window here for the federal government to establish a broad standard, and I think that it's quite clear I believe anyway, that they're not going to do that. And so we'll end up with states making their own decisions.
Wow, I was so encouraged up to this point. But thank you for your candor very much. It's very enlightening. Now I feel like I have a much firmer grasp on where this is going. Mr. Feldman, thank you so very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.